There are days when Chargers news does not explode. It moves quietly through the building, shows up in an old trade, in a camp battle that has not even really started yet, and in a roster fight that looks small until you connect every piece. That is exactly the kind of day this is. Joe Hortiz is still leaving fingerprints on moves that could bring back way more than they cost. The secondary is stepping into a new command while trying to protect a formula that already worked. And the offensive line has bets that say a lot about how Los Angeles wants to protect Justin Herbert. Stay with me. Subscribe to the channel because behind-the-scenes football wins games too. The first thing I am looking at here is not just Elijah Molden's name, it is the timing. Because when a defense changes coordinators, everybody immediately asks if the system can hold up. Jesse Minter left behind a clear identity, a smart, flexible secondary that was hard to attack through the air. And the Chargers finished 2 straight seasons in the top 10 in net yards allowed per pass attempt. That does not happen by accident. That happens when coaching, roster, and role all speak the same language. That is where the behind-the-scenes part gets overlooked. Chris O'Leary is stepping into the job of keeping that structure alive, but Steve Clinkscale is still in the defensive backs room, even after getting consideration for head coaching jobs. That is big. It is not headline noise. It is real continuity. It is the kind of steady presence that helps a player avoid having to relearn everything from the ground up when the calendar gets tight. And to me, Molden is the perfect symbol of that Joe Hortiz evaluation. Back then, the Chargers pulled him out of Tennessee for a 7th-round pick. That was it. A player drafted in the 3rd round in 2021, who had already lived as a nickel, a box safety, and a hybrid piece, landed in Los Angeles for a price that now looks almost crazy. That pick eventually reached Miami and became Max Llewellyn at number 238 in the 2026 draft. Meanwhile, the Chargers kept a defensive back who already signed a 3-year, $18.5 million extension and has delivered way more value than that number suggests. The biggest detail is the role. Molden does not need to be perfect on every coverage snap to change the shape of the defense. When he can operate consistently as a deep safety, Derwin James gets freedom. And when Derwin gets freedom, the Chargers' defense takes on a different personality. He can come down, line up in the nickel, move around in dime packages, and attack the game as a living piece. That kind of freedom helped the defense grow under Minter. But there is a real caution layer here. Molden dealt with injuries late in 2024, started 2025 behind schedule, and never looked completely settled physically, even while playing well in coverage. Now, entering camp healthy, with more continuity and 2 years left at roughly $15 million on his deal, the window is sitting right there. If he holds up for a full season, a trade that already looked smart could turn into daylight robbery. And it is interesting how an Elijah Molden trade teaches something that also fits the offense. Sometimes the real gain is not found in the cleanest name on the market. It is found in the player another team got tired of trying to fit. That is where Evan Neal enters the conversation. Neal was the 7th overall pick in the 2022 draft by the Giants. Alabama pedigree, size, resume, that entire aura of a tackle who was supposed to stabilize an offensive line for years. But the NFL did not play along. Through his first 3 seasons, he was far below expectations at tackle, became a target of criticism by almost every metric, and when New York tried to shift the plan to guard in 2025, injuries disrupted everything. The behind-the-scenes point is this. The Giants brought Neal back, but on a 1-year deal with no guaranteed money. That changes the entire read. This does not look like a franchise fully married to his recovery. It looks like a team leaving the door cracked open, watching camp, and deciding if there is still something there. And according to Dan Duggan of The Athletic, Neal is viewed as a long shot to make the Week 1 roster, currently lining up as a 3rd-string guard. For the Chargers, I do not see this as some glamorous headline. I see it as survival scouting, because Justin Herbert has spent way too much time paying the price for injuries, inconsistency, and broken protection. Healthy Joe Alt and Rashawn Slater should change the level at tackle, but inside there is still a fight. Cole Strange, Trevor Penning, and rookie Jake Slaughter are in the middle of that battle. None of them makes the position so locked down that Los Angeles can ignore a cheap chance. So the internal question would be simple. If Neal gets cut, is it worth bringing him into the building and testing him at guard? Not as a savior, not as a starter written in ink, as a big body, a former 1st-rounder, a player who may need a different environment and a different coach to breathe again. That is the kind of bet that does not excite people on announcement day, but can become valuable depth when November hits and the line starts hurting. But the offensive line is not the only room where the Chargers will face an uncomfortable decision, and the temperature changes here, because in the secondary, the issue does not look like a lack of options. It looks like too many good options for too few chairs. From the outside, Plenty of people will enter training camp watching guard. That makes sense. Jake Slaughter was picked in the second round to move from center and try to become a guard in front of Justin Herbert, but he already started the process losing reps to Trevor Penning and Kayode Awusika. That grabs attention. That creates noise. And with everyone trying to absorb Mike McDaniel's offense, the offensive line naturally becomes a daily storyline. But inside the defensive building, safety might be the battle that hurts the most when final cuts arrive. Look at the list. Derwin James, Elijah Molden, Tony Jefferson, R.J. Mickens, Genesis Smith, and Kendall Williamson. 6 names for a limited number of spots. The math gets even more interesting because Derwin could be treated as a cornerback in final roster calculations, depending on how Chris O'Leary keeps that freer role Jesse Minter used. Even then, pressure gets pushed somewhere else. If Los Angeles carries too many safeties, maybe it loses a corner it wanted to keep. That is the kind of detail a front office does not decide casually. Tony Jefferson is a veteran, a leader, a physical player, someone the fan base respects. R.J. Mickens already flashed as a rookie and could grow in year 2. Genesis Smith arrived as a 4th-round pick, and based on what showed up in the spring, already drew attention from teammates and coaches with his range and production. So this is not a battle between one clear favorite and a bunch of decorative names. This is real. That is why Molden being healthy matters so much. If he is the most locked-in starting safety, the other spot becomes open ground for different styles. Jefferson brings experience. Mickens brings recent development. Genesis brings new upside. Williamson is trying to force the team to look again. In a coordinator transition, that depth is gold, but it also creates an administrative blade. Talent you cut can show up producing somewhere else. So I want to feel Bolt Nation's red in the comments. Would you keep the trusted veteran, bet on Mickens' growth, or aggressively clear room for Genesis Smith? Because this battle may look secondary on paper, but when camp heats up, it could reveal exactly how the Chargers want to defend in 2026. After a secondary battle packed with familiar names, this next story feels completely different, almost like the other side of camp. The player who does not arrive with guarantees, does not arrive with status, but arrives with measurements and a life path that make a coach pause for a second and think, wait, maybe there is something to shape here. Laekin Vakalahi was born in Auckland, New Zealand on January 28, 2003. His first path was not American football. It was rugby league as a young player with the Ormeau Shearers. Then he moved to Melbourne and spent time in basketball, with no reports making clear whether that was professional or recreational. That part matters because it explains the type of athlete the Chargers are looking at. Not a lineman built since childhood at football camps in the United States. A big, coordinated body from sports where balance, contact, feet, and adaptation matter. The discovery story almost sounds like a little movie. His parents talked about their son to a friend of Chris Naoli, the Eagles' international scout. That random meeting became the thread that led Vakalahi to work out for Naoli in Philadelphia in 2024. He impressed enough for the Eagles to try a logic they know well. Take a massive athlete from the Australia-New Zealand region, with a rugby background, and see if there is a developable version there, in the spirit of what happened with Jordan Mailata. Vakalahi signed as an undrafted free agent in May of 2024, played left tackle in the preseason, landed on the practice squad, and ended up being part of a Philadelphia team that won the Super Bowl. Then came the reserve contract for 2025, the cut during final roster decisions, and only on May 12, 2026 did he show up again in a transaction, this time signing with the Chargers. No one should sell the available numbers as a finished gem. In one preseason game, he played 12 snaps at left guard, allowed 1 hurry, allowed 1 pressure, posted a 28.1 PFF offensive grade, a 34.6 run blocking grade, and an 8.8 pass blocking grade. That is raw. Very raw. But the measurements explain why Los Angeles was willing to take a look. 6'5", 318 pounds, 35-inch arms, 11-inch hands, and an 83-inch wingspan. Now he gets to work with Mike McDaniel and Butch Barry after spending time with Jeff Stoutland in Philadelphia. The contract is simple. 1 year, $885,000. The most realistic expectation is a fight for the practice squad. But for a team that needs to build offensive line depth, this is exactly the kind of quiet bet camp exists to test. It is not about promising he will protect Herbert in September. It is about finding out whether there is enough raw material to invest time before another team sees it first. When you put this whole news package together, it shows something that does not appear on a July scoreboard, but shows up when the season starts getting tight. Good rosters are built in the details. Molden could become an even more valuable trade. Neal would be a cheap bet if the market opens. The safety battle could force the Chargers to cut a useful player, and Vakalahi is the kind of raw material only real camp can reveal. Los Angeles does not need to win the headline today. It needs to build a deeper, smarter, tougher team. So hit the like button, subscribe, and come back tomorrow, because the build in Southern California is nowhere near finished.